The topic for this week is Thinking and Intelligence from Chapter 7. Let's begin with thinking. It's something we do all the time, but what is it exactly? Let's start with talking about cognition. What we are referring to here is the mental ability or process involved in gaining knowledge and comprehension. It is the aspect of the brain that uses the higher level mental processes. Thinking is one of these mental processes that helps us manipulate mental representations. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. We typically think of cognition and thinking as synonymous, but thinking is actually a process within the cognition realm. Some other processes include language, imagination, planning, judging, and problem solving, to name just a few. Cognition is very relevant to memory, as is learning, since it focuses on how people acquire, process, and store information. So let's go ahead and look at how we actually do this. Thinking is comprised of mental images that are representations in the mind based on the sensing of a particular stimuli. Mental representations may be experienced in various forms, such as words, visual images, or even sounds. Take, for example, the thought of an apple. If I ask you to imagine an apple, what do you think? Can you picture it in your mind? Is it golden, or red, or green, or maybe a couple different colors? Do you imagine it tastes sour, or sweet, or juicy? This is an example of a mental representation. If I ask you to think about your mother or father or family pet or some other family member, can you bring up a picture of them in your mind? We spend a lot of our time thinking. Even when we think we are not thinking, we tend to be thinking. We may be reflecting on something from the past, wondering about something in the present, or worried about something in the future. Did I make the right decision in moving to a new place? Will I get that job? What if I don't pass this test? Is there food in the refrigerator? It also includes daydreaming, where we can get some very interesting manipulation of mental representations, where we are usually only limited by our own imagination. Thinking is a pretty amazing capacity, where we can actually imagine ourselves at home when we're someplace else. We can see ourselves moving about from room to room, and that's pretty cool. Also, do you believe everything you think? For example, if I were to ask you which city is further west, Reno, Nevada, or San Diego, California, what would you say? Can you picture a map of the U.S. in your mind's eye and see where each of these cities are? And if you actually want to know the answer, it is Reno, Nevada is actually further west. So let's break it down into some of its major components. Let's take a look at concepts. The definition of concepts is the categorizations of objects, events, or people that share common properties. They are the basic elements of thoughts and the tools by which we classify things. This means that we are able to take complex phenomena and organize them into a simpler and easier way to think about things. When we come across newly encountered objects, we are able to point to our past experiences to aid in the thinking process. Take, for example, cars. If you drive a sports car, I'm guessing you don't look at an SUV and think that it's not in the category of car. So we are able to organize our mind to include all different types of cars in the concept of cars. When we are able to generalize information, it helps organize our thinking process. Another aspect of concepts are prototypes. Prototypes are highly representative examples of a concept. This means that a high agreement exists among people in a particular culture about which examples of a concept are considered prototypes. So, for example, when we think of furniture, let's look at that first column there. We might think of a chair or a couch first, but a piano is also in the conceptual category of furniture, although it's usually not considered high on the typical spectrum, unless maybe you're a pianist. The same with a vehicle. Look at that second column there. We probably think of a car first versus thinking of a tractor, but both are considered vehicles. In the third column, look at when we see a weapon, what might come to mind first is a gun or a knife. Typically, a fist is not high on the spectrum. And the fourth column, when we think of vegetable, you might think of peas or broccoli or carrots. And does an onion come to mind, the first thing you think of when you think of vegetable? So we'll have an opportunity to explore this more a little later. Okay, let's move on now to intelligence. We hear a lot about intelligence, but do we actually know what it is? Let's go ahead and define intelligence. For purposes of this class, is defined as the ability to acquire knowledge, think logically, and to use resources effectively. As you can see from this picture, different cultures will have different pathways to managing resources and learning to navigate their environment. A student in a Massachusetts classroom is going to have a different skill set than an Eskimo in Alaska. There are different theories on intelligence, and some we'll be working with are Gardner's multiple intelligences and Sternberg's practical intelligence. Gardner identifies 8 different types, including linguistic, which is the ability to use language well, so think of writers, lawyers, and politicians; logical mathematical, which is the skill to reason logically, scientific thinking, and problem solving. So think of a scientist, an economist, or a mathematician. Visuospatial, or spatial, which is the ability to manipulate objects visually. So think of artists or architects. Musical, which is the ability to perceive pitch and rhythm and to understand and produce music. Bodily kinesthetic, which is the ability to control body movements and skillfully manipulate objects. So think of skilled dancers or athletes or surgeons. Interpersonal, which is the skill to understand and relate well to others. Intrapersonal, which is the ability to understand oneself. And naturalistic, which is the understanding of natural world. So think of a meteorologist or a zoologist. Let's look now at Sternberg's practical intelligence, which involves intelligence that is related to how successful one is navigating through one's life. It is focused more on success in the world versus success in academics. One example might be street smarts and business smarts versus book smarts. So think about being able to navigate a complex public transportation system versus knowing about how the public transportation system works through reading books and research. Another intelligence that I'd like to touch upon is emotional intelligence, which involves the ability to read others' emotions accurately, to respond to them appropriately, to motivate oneself, to be aware of one's own emotions, and to regulate and control one's own emotional responses. All right, let's look a little bit more at emotional intelligence. There are 4 branches that I'd like to discuss here. Branch 1 is perceiving emotions. How are we understanding the stimuli that's coming in, and how does that affect what we're feeling? Branch 2 is what are we thinking about the emotions that we're feeling, and how does that affect what we're thinking? Branch 3, understanding emotions. So what sense are we making out of what we're feeling? And branch 4, how do we manage those emotions that we're feeling? So take anger management, for example. If someone has, say, a lack of impulse control and they get angry very easily and they find it very, very difficult to manage those emotions because they don't have the resources or the emotional intelligence to be able to respond appropriately in certain situations because their emotions have taken over. So when we have high levels of understanding our emotions and being able to manage our emotions, then we can see that we have we score high on the emotional intelligence scale. So some other aspects of high emotional intelligence would include empathy, compassion, self-awareness, and social skills. Okay, that's it for now.